Today we're going to learn about how to paint and how to use brushes in Photoshop. Until now you've probably used brushes to probably just paint or doodle on your Photoshop documents, but you want to consider there are different ways that brushes can be used in Photoshop besides painting. We use brushes when we create layer masks, we use the eraser, the history brush, the clone stamp, the burn tool, the dodge tool, and the sponge. If you remember, we use the left bracket to get a smaller brush and the right bracket to get a bigger brush. Today you're also going to learn that you can use keyboard shortcuts to make soft and hard brushes. To get a soft brush, you're going to hold down Shift plus the left bracket. To get a hard brush, you're going to hold down Shift plus the right bracket. We're going to open File, New. You're going to go to your Network folder, Graphics, Photoshop, number 5, Painting in Photoshop, and we're going to open up the 04 Start PSD. The first thing I noticed is that in my previous assignment I had used a red and a white foreground background, and I need to switch to get them back to default. Until now you've been taught to click on the little icon and then to switch back and forth to use the arrows. If you'll press your D key on the keyboard, you'll notice that you can quickly get to your default background foreground colors. If you press the X, it will switch the two colors together. In this lesson, the southwest picture is pretty small, so I want to increase the size by doing Control-0 to fit on the screen. The checkerboard pixels represent that there is transparency, but if I'm painting, the checkerboard pixels kind of are distracting, so I want to get rid of those. So to hide them, I go to Edit, Preferences, Transparency. Where it says grid size, I want to choose None for no grid. The first thing that we want to do when we are working with a painting or a drawing in Photoshop is we want to create an additional layer. The drawing layer should be the one that has the lines and all the sketches on it. I'm going to go down and click on New Layer, and I'm going to rename this layer and call it Paint. Now if I were to paint on this top layer right now, it would paint over the black lines on my drawing. So I need the black lines to be on top, so I rearrange my order. And one of the things I noticed about this picture is that the artist did not finish drawing out the picture. So I want to get a smaller brush. I want to get a 2-pixel black brush. I want it to be hard, so I can try the new keyboard shortcut, Shift and the right bracket. With my black default color selected, I'm going to draw a line, probably in 4 segments. You don't want to cut through the cactus. And it ends right there. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to close off the cactus by drawing just kind of a small heel. Now, if some of you are having trouble with your painting or your brush isn't quite acting right, press F5 on the keyboard. In prior lessons, we may have been in shape dynamics and you may have had fade or pen pressure, something like that turned on, and that will affect your drawing or your painting in this lesson. So we're going to make sure that's turned off, and we can close it back up. Now, I'm done with my drawing, so I'm going to lock that layer so I don't accidentally paint on top of it. So immediately I'm going to click Lock, and it locks the layer and protects it. Now, I want to paint the coyote, and I want to choose a brown. The color I chose is darker warm brown. You can choose whatever you would like. And we are going to use a paintbrush that is 10 pixels big, and you notice that I get a little no sign whenever my cursor is on the screen. That's telling me that I can't paint on that layer because it's locked. So I'm going to click on my paint layer, and now I get a brush. If I start to paint right now, it's going to be very difficult to stay inside the lines. So I'm going to use my drawing layer as kind of like a template. I'm going to use my magic wand. My tolerance is set at 30. I have to make sure contiguous is on, and the first thing I'm going to do, I'm on the drawing layer, I click and get the coyote's head. Next I'm going to hold down Shift and get his body, and then I click Shift again and get his tail. Now I go to the paint layer, switch back to my brush, and I am just going to paint along the outer edge of the coyote. You notice that it's okay if I go out of the line because Photoshop has protected it. Okay, and just to give it a little personality, I'm just going to kind of do a little splotch right there. The next thing I'm going to do is switch my brush to a lighter shade of brown. In my case, I got a medium warm brown. And I'm going to fill in the rest of the coyote. It's okay if you paint over a little bit of the brown from the first color. Basically, we kind of want him splotchy. Okay, he's painted, so we want to blend these two colors. You could use a smudge tool or use your finger to blend the colors with certain tools, but we want to make it uniform. So what we're going to do is go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you want to set your radius on 3. If you slid it all the way to the left, you'll notice that the hard lines are there. If you keep sliding it further to the right, the colors blend together so much that it actually disappears. By choosing a 3, we still should be able to see both colors. I press OK, and then I'm going to deselect with Control D. The next thing I'm going to do is use water paints in Photoshop. I want to get a kind of dark purple color, and I'm going to keep my brush at 10 with a hard edge, but I need to make some other brush adjustments. So I press F5 on my keyboard, I scroll down to where I see wet edges, I press click on that, and now as I drag my mouse back across the screen and I release it, when the mouse overlaps with what I've previously painted, you'll see that we can see wet edges, the same way that you would see if you were painting with water paints on a canvas. Okay, so I paint the first mountain purple. Don't worry about if it goes outside of the lines a little bit, we'll clean that up later. The next two mountains will be kind of a teal green color. You can choose what color as long as it's in that green family. The next mountains are going to be orange. Now when you do this for an assignment, you have to make sure that you do have overlapping lines. If you just simply paint and never lift off the paintbrush, those lines won't show up and you can't get credit for it. But you'll notice here that every time I release my mouse and I overlap, I see those lines. Now I'm going to get kind of a burgundy or a hot fuchsia color, and I'm going to paint the last mountain. After I use the wet edges, it's always important to remember to turn off whatever brush settings you had just done. Okay, I'm going to press F5 on my keyboard, and I have to remember to turn off wet edges. Otherwise, when I start to paint my cactus in a minute, it'll be very difficult to do. I need to get a small eraser. I'm going to use the little, probably smallest brush, maybe a 1 or 2 or 3, and I'm going to go in and clean up the lines that went outside of the line. Now we want to select our cactus. We want to use the lasso tool to make the selection, and we want the cactus to have a kind of a feathered soft edge. So I'm going to change my pixel value at the top to 3 pixels. Using the lasso, I'm going to start in the lower edge of the cactus. I want to include the little bottom hump thing of the cactus, and I'm simply tracing along the black line. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can go pretty quick because you remember you have add and subtract keys to add or subtract from your selection. So I go through here and make a really quick selection. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to fill this in with a bright green color, and I can, oops, let me get that. I can use my paint bucket, but we are learning to use keyboard shortcuts. My paint bucket is over here on the toolbar, but I want to learn how to use a keyboard shortcut. I'm going to choose any color green. I chose a darker green, and I am going to Alt backspace. That fills it in with the foreground color. Okay, next I want to choose a yellow color, and I'm going to apply a texture to this. So we need to load a brush. I go back to my paintbrush, and I click on my brush settings, go to my brush menu. I may need to load brushes if I don't see it. Right now you probably want assorted brushes, which should already be up there on your computer. I'm going to scroll through. Let's see. If you have to reload your brushes, you're going to click here, load brushes, or choose assorted brushes for the first set. It'll ask if you want to replace them. We're just going to choose a pen so it adds to the bottom of our list. As I scroll through the assorted brushes, you're going to see all kinds of cool shapes and patterns, and if you keep going, you will find, let's use this splotch. It's number 28, and I'm going to leave it at 28 pixels. What I want to do is I'm just going to lightly stamp my brush. I'm not dragging it, I'm just stamping my brush along the cactus to give it some texture. Now the reason that we kept the cactus selected is so that when we stamp, our yellow won't actually go outside of the lines, but I can get right up to the edge. Okay. We want to deselect our cactus, and we want to change back to our default colors. So I'm going to press the D on the keyboard. I'm going to select another brush. I'm going to choose the one kind of to the side of assorted. It's going to be a Starburst Small. It's right there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click little black spikes on my cactus to make it spiky. We also, you want to note that we deleted or deselected our selection so that the spikes would go outside of the cactus. That's pretty cool. The next thing that we want to do is get rid of that brush or change our brush back to a default one. So I'm going to choose the hard brush again, and I'm probably going to change the size down to about a 5. Now we want to sample colors that we can use in our document. I'm going to zoom in on the clouds just a little bit. And with my brush selected, if I hold down the Alt key, I can click right here in the purple area, and you'll notice that my foreground color changed to that exact purple. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go over these clouds just on the top edges really quick. Now I want to sample the kind of green color that's in the top left corner, so I hold down Alt, my cursor changes to an eyedropper, and I click there. I'm going to go along the bottom line. Okay, I want to add a blue color, so I'm going to go to the right side of my frame, and I'm going to hold down Alt again. I click, and I'm just going to put a couple of dots of blue in my clouds. We want to make these clouds look like they're wispy and kind of swirling, so I'm going to come to my toolbar, and I'm going to find the blur tool. It looks like a teardrop. Hidden behind the blur tool, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find smudge. Smudge is very similar to when you were a child and you were finger painting, so we're going to click on finger paint. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of swirl my cursor and my mouse, and the colors kind of blend together. It's almost like when we use the Gaussian blur, but because you're in control, it's not necessarily a perfect pattern. It's okay to see a little bit of white in there. You want to still be able to see that you've got 3 colors. If I look here, I see purple, blue, and green. The next thing that we want to do is choose our elliptical marquee tool, and we are going to choose or select the circle part of the sun. Remember, if your selection's not perfect, you can go up and go to Select, Transform Selection, and make minor adjustments as you need to. Press Enter or check to get out of that box. Now with our circle selected, we want to apply a gradient, and probably your gradient may be hidden beneath the paint bucket, so we're going to click back on Gradient. We want a radial gradient. This is the first time we're using a radial gradient. It means that the colors will come directly from the center of whatever the object is and go outward. So I click on that. I'm going to click up here in the top left corner on my gradient picker, and I want to look at some of the presets that have been created for us. I'm going to choose the orange, yellow, orange gradient. I press OK. Wherever I start drawing, my line will be orange, in the middle will be yellow, and when I release the mouse at the end of the circle, it will be orange again. So we get kind of a little trippy looking sun. We're going to deselect, and we want to go back to our paintbrush. We want to sample the orange color that's in the middle, so I hold down my Alt key, sampling the orange. And I want the brush to look like it's fading at the end for the sun rays. So remember, I'm going to go back and press F5 on my keyboard, go to Shape Dynamics. We've done this before in another lesson. We're going to choose Fade. And I want, let me look at the settings. Okay, we're going to change our fade. We want the control fade value to 15 pixels. We want our minimum diameter to go to 0. So what this tells me is that as I start to draw drag my brush, it'll go 15 pixels out before it actually disappears. Okay, I'm going to leave my brush set at 5. It's going to be a hard brush, and I'm going to go in between each black ray and drag the mouse. You'll notice that my sun rays look like teardrops, and that's exactly what you want yours to look like. Okay, when we're done doing the sun rays, it's important to remember to go back and take the fade value off of your brush. So again, we're going to press F5, we go to Control, and we're going to choose Off. So far, you guys are doing really good if you're up to this point. We're going to use our rectangular marquee tool. We want to select from the sky all the way down to kind of our horizon. It's okay if your horizon doesn't match up perfect, because we can adjust this in a moment. We want to click on our gradient tool. We're going to go to we want to do a linear gradient, and we want to choose our gradient picker. I want to choose the one, it's right next to the orange, yellow, orange that we did. It is orange, green, violet, or violet, green, orange. I press OK. If I apply a gradient to it right now, it's going to cover up all the work that we spent creating that. So I'm going to Control Z, and I want to come up here to my blending mode, and I want it to go behind everything that I've previously painted. This is a really cool shortcut because it beats having to paint around stuff. You just have to make sure that everything is already painted. So I choose behind, and I look at this and I think, okay, purple should go at the horizon, green, and then orange should be at the top because that's closest to the sun. So I'm going to make a semi-diagonal line starting at the horizon, going to the sky, and now you'll notice that the gradient goes behind everything that we've already painted. If you like what you've done, you're going to Control Deselect. Now, one of the things I noticed is when I cleaned up with my eraser earlier, I didn't get a perfect horizon, so I'm going to come down here. If there was any extra mountain area that I painted, I want to get rid of that right now. Okay. Next, I'm going to remember to go to my gradient tool and turn off my blending mode of behind and take it back to normal, so when I use a gradient later it'll be okay. Now we're going to use the rectangular marquee tool again. We're going to select the horizon down to the ground. I'm going to choose kind of a sand color. The color that I'm picking, if I double click on it, is pale cool brown. Now I want to select a really large paintbrush. And I want to think about this. If I were to try to paint all of this sand, I would have to get around all of these little spikes and all the little details. Instead, I want to change my blending mode to behind. It'll do the same thing that the gradient did. And in order to do this really quick, I'm going to get like a really big brush. Okay. Our brush is huge, so now I'm going to paint with it. You'll notice that earlier, if you were upset because your dog looked a little pale, that now the color is filled in. Before I deselect, I want to make sure I change my blending mode back to normal, and I'm going to deselect. Now I'm going to go up and turn my paint layer off and look at our drawing layer for just a moment. I want to create my own brush. So far you've used brushes that other people have created, but we're going to create our own. We're going to choose our rectangular marquee tool, and up at the sun you want to select this area right here. I've zoomed in so you can see exactly what I've selected. Remember, if you need to adjust your selection, you go to Select, Transform Selection, and I can nudge this in just a little bit. Okay, press Enter. Now we're going to go to Edit, define brush preset. Photoshop is really cool. It will let me create any kind of brush as long as I make the selection first. This brush we are going to rename, and I'm just going to call it Sun so I remember where I found it or what part it's from. So I press OK. Turning my paint layer back on, I'm going to deselect the sun and Control 0 so I can zoom out. I'm going to choose my paintbrush, get a little bit darker color brown. The brown that I'm choosing is medium cool brown. Go up to my brush picker. The very last brush that I created will be the one that is at the bottom. Click on the new brush that I just made, and I have to make sure that I've changed my blending mode back to normal from when I painted the sand originally. I don't know what kind of tracks these are, but we're just going to print some tracks here. Possibly this is an animal that has wandered through the desert. When I get that done, I'm almost complete. I'm going to click on my drawing layer. I'm going to click on my text tool. I'm going to go to the bottom of my screen, and probably in about a 20-point font, 25-point font, 30, somewhere around there, I'm going to type my name. You'll do your first name, last initial. In this case, I'll just type in Bradley. Can be any font that you want to use, any color. Our name, when we originally type it, is flat. It means it has no depth or dimension to it. It doesn't stand off the page. So I want to add a layer style. You'll start wanting to do this to all of your documents. We're going to press FX, and I want to do a drop shadow. I think that looks nice. Maybe adjust some of the settings. Push my drop shadow up a little bit. Possibly do an outer glow. Then I'm going to press OK. I'm going to go to File, Save, so I save it once as a PSD. And then I'm going to go to File, Save As, and save it as a JPEG. Remember that when you change to a JPEG, you have to change the extension down here and check your extension right there. We're going to call this one your name _ southwest .jpg or JPG. Once you've done this, you're going to save it. Remember that saving it as a JPEG flattens it down to one layer. Remember that saving it as a JPEG flattens it down to one layer. After that, you may close out and you are done with this lesson.